What's up everyone, Bradley Jack Design here with another design breakdown. This time we're going to take a look at this Devin Booker design I created. So I've got the final one here. I'm going to get rid of that and we're going to start from scratch. And I'm going to show you a little bit more of the process of why I did stuff and what my idea was for this design. So I know I wanted to do a Devin Booker design. I wanted to do something for an orange team in the NBA. So I chose the Suns because they're orange. So it all started off with this photo of Devin Booker. So I've got some edits on that photo. If we turn all of this off, that's with nothing essentially, and that's with the edits. So really what this is I clipped it out. I used one of my actions that are available on my website. I think I used BJD2. And then I added a little bit of yellow fixing to it, some hue and saturation layers to tweak a couple things, and then a curves layer to brighten up some of the shadows. And then this curves layer, which does nothing, so I'm just going to delete it. So that's Devin Booker. So we've got him eventually. This is what happens when you save files. So we have him in this main file here. So I started off having him stand on the sun. So here's the sun. There's an eclipse behind it because this is set to screen. I'll show you why later. Then I have two layers underneath set to screen to accentuate these flares that are coming off of the sun. So if we hop up here, we go back to Devin Booker. I've got a layer on top of him that's maxed out a little bit to show like he's on the sun. It's just the same sun layer rotated a bit, just so there's a little bit more difference. So then I've got a couple layers to do some editing on Devin Booker. So I've got one to brighten up everything. I've got one that changes the white point so it color corrects it a little bit. As you can see, darkens it up a bit too. I have a selective color layer to boost some of the reds. I have a curves layer that is going to halo around everything, give it a little light edge around it. And then I have the same thing, but this one is yellow. As you can see, I boosted the reds and greens and decreased the blues. Then I have a gradient map, which is masked to only these bottom parts that are closest to the sun. And then a gradient map set to soft light that is orange, black, and white to give a little bit of a orange overcast to the whole image of Devin Booker. And I used the orange that the Suns use for that. So I wanted to do this sort of space scene because it's the Suns. It's kind of an obvious on the nose thing to do, but I wanted to do something a little bit different. So I've got him down here on the sun. That was the start. Let me see if I can find this. The whole reason I did this was because I found this photo on Pinterest. So I thought this was cool. So sort of a cutout with some stars, sky in the background, and then there's this door, but I didn't do that. But this was the whole inspiration for this piece. Just a little behind the scenes of why I thought of this idea. Just something I saw and interpreted it and wanted to incorporate my own twist on how to do it. So I've got some stars here that I threw in the background. These are just images of stars that I found online set to screen. They're just photos from NASA. You can find a lot of nice photos of the actual stars from NASA. And I have a hue and saturation layer here to reduce the saturation because they were a little bit too bold. So I've got some stars in the background. I have some suns in here. I'm going to throw those in later. But process-wise, what I needed next was I needed a photo of Devin Booker. So here's a photo of Devin Booker I clipped out. You know, it's his head. You can kind of tell it's him. If you're a fan, you might be able to tell that it's him. I have some effects on here that I used later, and I'll show them in a sec. But first things first, here's the sky image that is masked to this photo of Devin Booker clipped. And that's with a camera raw filter on it to boost some of the colors and contrast and whatnot. So as you can see where I'm getting this inspiration from and going with that idea. I have a couple other layers on top of here just to darken things up a bit, boost some of the blues, and then darken up the bottom here so you can see that this is where the flares are coming off of. And this is why I have it set to screen, the sun. So if we go back up here to the sun, if I set this to normal, it's got all the black in it, so it wouldn't show beneath it. So that's why I have it set to screen, which it's going to hop back to eventually and lag and break everything. All right, there we go. So we'll go back down here. So we have the portal is what I wanted to do this. So I wanted to do something like the inspiration here, but I wanted to make it more futuristic with like a portal, you know, sort of Doctor Strange wormhole sort of deal. So I looked up some photos of wormholes and people renderings of wormholes, and I put them on here. So I've got the portal here. Now the portal edge is very similar to what I had in the inspiration, but I don't like that. I wanted it to be something unique. So what I did was I found some cool wormhole-like images that I used to go around the edge of his photo here. So we'll just start here. So I found this. So I have this here. So this is a photo I downloaded that I have. You can see it's a wormhole. If I add just a quick like gradient behind it, you can see this is what it looks like on black. So it's like a, you know, cool wormhole looking thing. So I have that, I have it behind it, and I have a gradient map on top of this. So originally it's this purple. So I duplicated that a couple times. I have a couple different frames that are slightly different than that. And I have a levels layer on this one to make it a little bit darker. So this is to begin the portal experiment, to make this look like a portal. So there's some big portals in the background or whatever. So it's showing off some of these vibes. And then I have a gradient map on top of that that is using the sun's color. Actually, I think I sampled colors from the sun down here. So a dark color and a light color. And I have that set to color. So it's just changing the color of it. It's not changing the lightness or brightness or luminosity of anything. So I've got those there. So those are some big vibes on here. This is called some shit you can't even see because you can barely see it. So I've got this sort of this glowing edge around it, an outer glow that I put a couple clouds on top of with curves, so it had a little bit of stuff. But really in the final, you can't even really see what this does, as you can see. So if I zoom in, it's adding just sort of this little bit of a halo around it, but it's got some dimension to it where it's brighter and darker in some areas. So next we need to do the rest of the portal. So I have this big, huge, giant group, portal flares. So I'm gonna turn that on. So I have this masked like this. So it's masking out some of the edges that you could see. If the edges weren't completely clean, I got rid of them. So we're gonna start from the bottom here, and I'm gonna show you what I did. So I've got some portals down here, and each of these has its own individual gradient map. I didn't feel like going into the smart objects and changing it. But you can see if I turn some of these on, group by group, it's adding a little bit of these sort of flame flares to the edge of the Devin Booker silhouette. And the way I did that, some of them are better than others, and some of them are easier than others, as you can see. But like this here. So what this is, it's the same photo that I used as the background, or similar photo. But what I did was I used the puppet warp tool. I didn't use it on that one. I didn't use it on that one. Oh, I stopped using it because it was easier this way. So the puppet warp, what it allows you to do is you can go in and you can add points and you can bend the object. So basically, if I go to some of these earlier ones down here, so this is puppet warp. So you can set points. So basically I clicked around the circle and then I went ahead and bent it to look and drag. You drag these up, drag these down, dragged it to the edge of where his silhouette is. So if I go up here and turn this silhouette off, if I can find it. I lost it. It's gone forever. Is it down here? Here we go. Oh, I need to hit enter because I'm inside Puppet Warp. So if I turn this off, so this is the shit you can't even see. Portal. So you can see here, I bent it around the edges so it followed that curvature. And I'll show this a little bit better. Oops, don't want to turn that on. I'll show this a little bit better with something else I added to it. Let me turn the portal back on. So if I can hop back out here. So if I just turn these on, you can see it adds a little bit of flare around all of the edges. So there's a bunch of layers that do this. So you can see it's adding to the front, adding to the back. I gave up doing the puppet warp at the end because there's a lot of curves here that you can sort of match, but I did a little bit down here as well. So I used this 1 or 2 photos every time, rotated it a bit to make it a little bit different, to add these portals. And this is all masked to an inverted selection of the portal layer. So you can't see anything on the inside. If I disable this layer mask, since this is on top, you can see all the crap. You can see how I made it and how the edges match up and how I did that. So I'm gonna turn that back on because we want that on. And then I have a levels layer on top of all of this, which you can see darkens everything up, makes it a little bit more vibrant. So those are the portal flares. On top of this, I have these lightning bolts. So this is what gives it a little bit more dimension, because you can't have a portal and have it not bleed onto the inside because that doesn't look right. So this is where I added some of these bolts. So you can see these lightning bolts up here that follow the contour of the silhouette. And that's what I use the puppet warp for. So most of these bolts are this image here. It's this straight sort of laser bolt with this sort of electric line going around it. So each layer has a gradient map layer on top of it, set to normal, using the same colors as before, but there's a black point and a white point as well. And then I have a puppet warp layer on it. So you can see on here, I drew all these lines going across. This was a straight line, and I basically, rotated it, and then I moved each line to follow the curvature of the silhouette. So I did that for each one of these bolts. So if I hop back out and I turn these on, you can see that these bolts down here, they all follow the curvature of that silhouette. Because I wanted the portal or whatever to be the silhouette of his head, like in the inspiration I showed you. And the puppet warp tool comes incredibly handy for that. So you can see I puppet warped these like 9 or 10 to go all the way around his head. So then what do we have here? So now we've got sort of this composition going on. We got big head here. We've got his body here. So I needed something to come through the portal. So to do that, I have these 2 photos. I've got 2 layers to this. So I've got one layer that is here, that is behind this area on the left to show some dimension. So that's all this big book back is for, is to be behind these layers and masked inside of the portal. The other layer, if I turn it on, is to be outside the layer. So it looks like he's coming in or out of the portal. So that was the whole point. So I've got a couple layers down here to do a couple effects, sort of just a, halo going around him. But then the big one, I've got a couple more. As you can see, there's a bunch more layers. So I did a little bit of camera on here, and I've got some camera raw settings on the smart object of him as well, which I can show here. There's a bunch of stuff in here. So this was the original image. Let's just pop that up to the top. Turn off everything. So this is the original image. And then these are the edits. So again, I used one of my actions. Sorry, let me pull that back up and let me show you exactly what I did. So let's see here, turn all this off. So this is the action, yellow fix. And then I added hue and saturation and some curves to brighten up his eyes a bit. I added a curves layer to brighten up the darks, and then a selective color to turn the oranges, to boost the red and oranges a bit. And I have another layer on top that fixes some of the edges. So that's what I did there. So then on top of that, I've got gradient map layer set to normal at 10%, just to give a little bit of a hue that you would see around the edges of this. And then I've got a couple layers. I've got an overlay layer and a color layer, where I pretty much just sort of painted around the sides of his head and his arms where it would touch this. And I have those set to orange. Then we've got a curves layer, which is darkening his face. I've got another curves layer, which is lightening the outside of him. I've got another curves layer that's lightening the outside of him even more. And you can tell by the selections of the mask. This layer darkens his face just a little bit. And then I've got 2 layers that I can turn on that give that halo effect around like we did on the arm already. So I've got 2 of those. I've got one set to 50% because it was a little too much. So we've got book in the front, book in the back. Those are all set. So once I had this, I wanted to throw in some text. So the text is the best part about this because it's super easy. Here's the text. So the text is actually a smart object, but the smart object is just a text with a bunch of effects on it. And the effects are actually just a default style. So under styles in Photoshop, if you have them loaded, it's just one of these Chrome styles. I think it's this Chrome style here. Sky is what it's called. And then I just tweak the gradient overlay a little bit to make the colors blue instead of the colors that are default on there. So, I think it looked nice. That's why I kept it in here. And then I simply just add a displacement to it, which displaces it using this, which is a sort of glitchy photo with a gradient map on top of it. Let me open this up. So it's just sort of these horizontal glitchings. I've used these before. Actually used this in a graphic before. So I just took it from something I made previously and added it to this just as a small aspect. So we've got Booker in the front. We got a big photo of Booker in the back for composition. We have some text in here. But then I thought there needed to be some other stuff in this white space here. So what I wanted to do was I added some suns. So here's a sun here. Blurred it a little bit so it showed that it's in the front. I've got this sun in the background. That's behind the portal up here, so it's adding a little bit of depth. And then the same thing, I added a sun right here, which I will show you like that. Bam, so there's a sun there. So this is adding a little bit more depth. There's suns in the front, suns in the back. He's standing on a sun. So we have some dimension with the composition. I then added a couple flares. So I added a flare right here that's behind the portal. So it's, has some sort of energy behind the portal. So it's adding a little bit depth in front of Booker. And then I added an optical flare right here because I wanted a flare on his shoulder. And then I have a gradient map that is coloring this area down here because without this, wherever the sun is overlaying on top of the blue, it's just turning purple. So you can see it's definitely purple there. So this is a gradient map, probably set to normal, with the same gradient we used before. The same colors are in the sun, just to make it so it's actually red. So I think that's pretty much everything. So we got everything going on here. Got some flares and stuff, got the sun, we've got the text. So then I did some final edits. So I made a new layer, flattened everything to that layer, and then I did an adaptive wide angle lens and a lens correction, which as you can see does this. It's just warping the outsides a bit to give a little bit of movement to the piece. But you can see this thing appears because I added a satellite, which I completely forgot about. So I found a photo of the satellite, popped it in there, did a little basic lighting to it, added a little bit of a flare to it. So then we go back here. We've got some lighting effects. I removed them, or not lighting effects, some camera effects. I masked it away from his face just so his face was clearer because this does distort everything a little bit. I then took that layer, duplicated it, and then I added a ripple layer to it and a radial blur. So the radial blur is going to, let me just turn it on, I'll show you. So you can't really see it too much because I have most of it masked out from the middle here. You can see there's a gradient going to the back. But let's see if we can look close. Yeah, so you can see it up here. It's just blurring it a little bit more, distorting it a little bit more. That's what these effects are. So play around with stuff like that. I didn't really use the ripple before this, but it worked out for what I wanted. So after we did those effects, I actually then have some more stars in the front I added after the fact because I did not want these to be distorted. It's one of those same star photos that I used from the bottom. I just blew it up a bunch and threw a Gaussian blur on it, set to screen so it's a little blurred, and then added a lens dirt, which I often do in a lot of my designs to add a little bit more depth and dimension as if you're looking through a camera lens. I added a color lookup of teal orange plus contrast that's set to soft light at 20%. Gradient map set to soft light at 25% to turn everything a little bit more orange. And a lot of this stuff up here is like barely doing anything. If I turn off this gradient and turn it back on, you can barely see what it does. But if I set this to 100%, you can see how obnoxious this looks and blown out. So I set it to 25, just so it did it a little bit. I have a selective color layer on top of this, which is doing what? It's changing the magentas. It's getting rid of this sort of purple hue. So you can see this area is real purpley from where the inside of this thing is. So if I turn that off, or turn it on, it gets rid of some of that. I then have a layer on here. This is just some noise. I have a little bit of a levels layer to get rid of some of the gray, but it still has plenty of noise in there. If I zoom in, you can see this is all the noise I added. I wanted to add some noise to it just because. So we got some noise. That's the overlay for it. And then last but not least, I have a final layer, which I did some unsharpening and some camera masking or camera raw filtering. But I actually have this only set to 25%. And that's to just, the effects I did I thought were a little bit too heavy. So I turn that off and turn it back on. It does a slight contrast change to it. But that's what it took to create this graphic. And that was the thought behind it. So we've got the original inspiration here and what I made. You can see it's clearly, I can say it's inspired by this, but it looks completely different. You know, I'm not copying this. I'm just using this as a nice starter, as inspiration for a composition, which is something that I think a lot of designers could and should do, get inspired by things that aren't sports design related, or even if they are, use a little bit of that or use it as a starting point and then create something on your own like this. So I hope you guys learned something from this. Let me know in the comments below what stuck out to you. What stuck out to you? Probably Puppet Warp. Finding some of these assets that you can use to make these sort of lightning bolt shapes and whatnot. I actually found those on footagecrate.com. You can download some really cool effects on there. You can download a couple for free each day. So I got this from Footage Crate. A lot of the other stuff I got from other subscription sites that I have. But let me know in the comments below what you liked about this. And yeah, let me know what other videos you might want to see. Any tutorials from basic to advanced, I'll go ahead and make them for you guys. Other than that, just make sure to like and subscribe. Thanks.